There are mistakes you only make once in your life. For them, that mistake was driving three black SUVs up a snow-covered dirt road, carrying heavy weapons, thinking they could scare someone into selling their land for pennies. They thought they were leaning on an ordinary family. What they didn't know was that in the wooden cabin deep in these woods, a ghost that had been sleeping for 14 years was waiting to be awakened. And that morning, when gunfire echoed and my war dog fell at my daughter's feet, they signed their own death warrant. 4 years ago, when I left the CIA, all I wanted was a place where no one would find me. No more urgent calls in the middle of the night. No more looking into the pleading eyes of people I couldn't save. Claire and I chose Montana, where snow-capped mountains stretch to the horizon, where the wind carries the scent of pine and the cries of eagles bounce off faraway cliffs. Our 480-acre ranch lay in the middle of Madison Valley, nearly 60 miles from the nearest town. Only one dirt road led in frozen solid in winter, a muddy slog in spring, and that was exactly why I loved it. Here, every morning I made coffee in our log cabin kitchen, looking out over mist-covered fields. Hailey, my 7-year-old daughter, would ride her dark bay Morgan horse, driving cattle out to pasture. Claire checked on the small veterinary clinic she had set up in a renovated barn, treating the horses and cattle of nearby ranches. We had Ranger, a Belgian Malinois, who'd served beside me in countless operations. He'd charged into smoke and gunfire in Fallujah, sniffed through rubble in Aleppo, and now lazed on our porch, pretending to sleep while his ears stayed alert for anything unusual. Outsiders said the land was worth over $6 million, but to me, its true value was in the absolute silence, in the sense that the outside world couldn't touch my family. I'd spent my life in places that didn't exist on maps, where the line between living and dying was no thicker than a trigger pull. Here, I was just a rancher, a husband, a father. But peace is the most fragile thing in the world. That morning, I was feeding the horses in the barn when I heard engines, a sound that didn't belong in the stillness of the mountains. Big engines, multiple vehicles, tires crunching over frozen ground. Instinct switched on, the mode Claire called my work mode. I straightened up, eyes scanning the white expanse, spotting three black SUVs tearing up the road, flinging snow behind them. They stopped less than 20 yards from my house. Doors opened, and 10 men spilled out. All wore black tactical gear helmets, body armor, M4 carbines with scopes moving in an urban assault formation I knew all too well. Patches on their arms read, U.S. Federal Marshal, but I only needed 2 seconds to know they were fake. Their stance was too professional for small-town cops, but their movement was mismatched, lacking the unity of a team that had trained together for years. These were private military contractors, the kind corporations hire to do things they don't want the government to see. The leader, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes cold as steel, strode up and shoved a paper at me, rattling off something about reports of an illegal weapons cache. I took it, pretended to read, but I was already scanning. The spacing between shooters, the placement of vehicles, the blind spots in their coverage. They'd parked too close to the house, mistake number one. Ranger stood at the porch, teeth bared, hackles raised. Hailey was behind him, wide-eyed, her hand clutching his collar. I was about to signal her to step back when the leader barked, "Aggressive dog, neutralize it." 3 sharp cracks split the air, snow sprayed from Ranger's body as he dropped. My world shrank to a single point, the warm body of Ranger collapsing into the snow. Hailey screamed, lunging forward, but Claire grabbed her, holding her tight. I knelt beside him, my hand on his fur, still warm. That was the moment I had to choose. Unleash my fury then and there, or play the part of the confused, powerless rancher, and wait. I chose to wait. But in my chest, the thing my old teammates used to call the ghost had already woken up. 3 hours after the SUVs disappeared down the frozen road, the quiet returned to the valley, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet we'd had before. This one had an edge to it, like the air before a lightning strike. Hailey hadn't spoken a word since Ranger fell. Claire stayed close to her, pretending to be busy in the kitchen but watching me from the corner of her eye. She knew that look, the one I got before things went dark. At exactly noon, the hum of another engine broke the stillness. This one wasn't loud and aggressive. It was smooth, expensive. A black Cadillac Escalade rolled up our drive, its glossy paint catching the pale winter sun. The passenger door opened. and a woman stepped out like she was arriving at a red carpet event rather than an isolated ranch in the Montana wilderness. She was in her 50s, her dark hair pulled into a perfect chignon, a tailored black pantsuit hugging her frame. On her wrist, a watch that could have paid for a semester at an Ivy League school. Her heels sank slightly into the snow as she crossed to my porch, but she didn't break stride. Behind her, two men in heavy winter coats pretended to be casual, but their stiff posture and the slight bulge at their hips told me they were armed. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I'm Victoria Drake." She extended a gloved hand, and I shook it, noting the cool, firm grip. "I heard about the unfortunate incident this morning," she continued, her lips curving into what might have been sympathy if her eyes weren't so sharp and assessing. "I'm here to offer a way out." From her leather briefcase, she pulled a thick folder and handed it to me. Inside was a purchase contract for the ranch, 480 acres of pristine mountain land offered at $750,000. Less than 1/10 of its actual market value. "You've got to be kidding," I said, letting a bitter laugh slip out. She smiled like a cat with a mouse cornered. "It's a fair offer considering the circumstances, Mr. Cross. You're isolated here. No neighbors to help if trouble comes knocking again. And from what I hear, the federal marshals have already expressed concerns about your property." The message was clear. Take the money and vanish, or we'll make your life hell until you do. I let my shoulders sag, lowering my gaze as if I were a man already beaten. "I just want all this to stop," I muttered, injecting just enough tremor into my voice to sell the act. Inside, my mind was working like it used to in briefing rooms overseas, turning over every detail of her appearance, her words, her bodyguard's stances, the Escalade's license plate. The two men with her moved like they'd had military training, but it was outdated, probably a decade since they'd been in uniform. Drake herself carried the aura of someone who'd been in boardrooms where billions shifted hands with a single signature. But there was something else, an undercurrent of confidence that came from more than just money. She hadn't sent those contractors this morning to scare me. She'd sent them to test me. When she left, I stayed on the porch, watching the Escalade's taillights vanish into the snow haze. Claire stepped out beside me, her arms folded tight against the cold. "She's not just some developer," Claire said quietly. I nodded. She's running something bigger, and now she thinks she's got leverage." That night, after Hailey had gone to bed, we sat at the kitchen table, the map of the valley spread between us. Claire tapped the properties around ours, 3 already bought by Drake in the last 2 years, 2 more currently up for sale. "She's building a block," I said, "and ours is the cornerstone." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "So what's the plan?" I glanced toward the dark window, the reflection of my own face staring back. "We find out who she really is and what she wants with this land. Then we take it apart." The investigation began before sunrise. Claire reached out to her clients' ranchers who trusted her more than any sheriff. Over coffee at their kitchen tables, she heard about fences cut in the night, cattle mysteriously sickened, barns burning to the ground with no clear cause. Always after a refusal to sell. Meanwhile, I was working a different angle. The 2 bodyguards had worn jackets with a stitched logo from a high-end hunting outfitter in Billings. A few phone calls to old contacts in the security contracting world, and I had names. Both ex-Army Rangers. Both now freelancing for private military firms with ties to offshore shell companies. Hailey, curious and sharper than I like to admit, offered to help. I told her no at first, but by the 3rd day she was in my office, grinning, with a flash drive in her hand. She'd found Victoria Drake's son's social media profiles private, but not private enough for someone with Hailey's skill set. Among the photos of ski trips and yacht parties were images of maps and blueprints, land plots in our valley, annotated with dates and purchase prices. Claire leaned over my shoulder as I clicked through. "Looks like the whole valley's for sale," she murmured. "Not for sale," I said. "For the taking." What Drake didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every time she sent someone to pressure us, she was giving me another thread to pull. And eventually, all threads lead back to the hand that holds them. I looked at Claire. "We're not selling, and we're not running." She met my gaze without hesitation. "Then we'd better be ready for what's coming next." 2 weeks of digging turned Victoria Drake from a name on a contract into something far more dangerous. By the time I laid everything out on the table, literally, maps and printed documents spread across the worn oak, Claire's expression had shifted from concern to outright disbelief. She's not just buying up ranch land, I said, tapping a line of red pins marking the valley. She's assembling a corridor, one continuous strip, from the old rail spur to the private airfield outside Sheridan. If she locks down our property, she controls the entire stretch. Claire leaned in, following the pins with her finger. Why? There's no commercial value to stringing together that much wilderness. There is if you're trying to move things no one's supposed to see, I replied. The evidence was ugly. Every ranch Drake Global Holdings had acquired in the past 5 years had been renovated into a private facility storage barns with reinforced concrete floors, airstrips resurfaced to handle heavy cargo, communications towers with encrypted satellite links. On paper, they were all agricultural improvements. In reality, they were infrastructure for something that needed space, secrecy, and distance from prying eyes. Through my own channels, I traced her holding companies back to accounts in the Cayman Islands, then to a consulting group in Dubai. That group had a history with arms trafficking, supplying weapons to warlords in Africa, lost cargo in the Balkans, even a few shipments that had quietly disappeared from U.S. military stockpiles overseas. Claire's hand stilled on the map. This is bigger than just her. Much bigger, I said. And if she's moving that kind of product, she needs a safe hub inside the U.S., the kind of hub where federal oversight is minimal. Out here, with the right people in her pocket, she can operate for years without anyone asking questions. Those right people weren't hard to find. Claire's vet work gave her excuses to talk to every landowner in a 50-mile radius. And in those conversations, certain names kept coming up. Sheriff Paul Denvers, County Commissioner Lyle Hargrove, Judge Amanda Kell. People who suddenly had new trucks, new houses, or a tendency to vacation in the Caribbean every winter. The corruption was systematic. Sell to Drake, and you got paid sometimes over market value if you played nice. Refuse, and accidents happened. Claire had heard about them firsthand. A barn burning down with livestock inside, cattle mysteriously poisoned, fences cut so herds wandered miles away and froze in the winter cold. Hailey, meanwhile, had become an unofficial member of the operation, though I'd never admit it to anyone outside this house. She was good, too good. In 1 week, she'd pulled the metadata off those land plot images she found on Drake's son's account. That metadata led her to a private server linked to one of Drake Global's satellite offices in Bozeman. What we found there made my skin crawl. Blueprints for a research and development campus right in the middle of our valley. The specs weren't for agriculture, they were for hardened facilities, security perimeters, underground storage. The design included blast doors, climate-controlled vaults, and a private hangar. This isn't farming, Hailey said quietly, scrolling through the files. This is military. Not military in the patriotic sense, military in the covert, deniable, and entirely illegal sense. It was around then that the harassment escalated. Our power wasn't just cut, it was surgically taken out in 3 separate places along the line. The generator Claire and I had relied on for years was sabotaged, its fuel lines sliced so cleanly it could have been done with a scalpel. Our internet went dark, replaced by intermittent bursts of static on the satellite dish. Then came the livestock. 3 cattle dead in 1 morning. The autopsy Claire performed confirmed my suspicion: poison. The kind designed to mimic natural illness, undetectable unless you knew exactly what to test for. One night, while walking the perimeter, I found a small black camera hidden under the eaves of our barn. Thermal imaging capable, linked to a transmitter buried in the snow. It was pointed directly at the back door of our house. They weren't just watching, they were studying. Claire's face was tight as she cleaned her tools after the autopsy. If she's going to these lengths, she's close to making her move. She's already making it, I said. She's tightening the noose. And when she thinks we've got no way out, she'll pull it. I'd been on both ends of operations like this before. The sequence was always the same: isolation, intimidation, removal. The removal phase was the one you didn't come back from. 2 nights later, I caught sight of headlights cresting the ridge at 2 a.m. I killed the lights in the house and grabbed the thermal scope. 3 vehicles. The lead one wasn't an SUV, it was a military surplus Humvee. Through the scope, I caught a glimpse of faces, gear. These weren't the sloppy contractors from the first visit. Their posture was tight, their movements crisp. Full tactical gear, suppressed rifles, night vision goggles. The kind of team you only call when you want something done clean, fast, and final. I eased the scope down, my breath fogging in the cold air. This wasn't about scaring us anymore. This was the phase where people disappeared. Inside, Hailey was at the kitchen table with her laptop, screens full of code. Claire was cleaning her .308 rifle. I closed the door behind me. "It's starting," I said. Neither of them asked what I meant. We all knew. The days that followed felt like living inside a tightening vice. Every morning, something new was broken, missing, or poisoned. It was no longer about pushing us to sell. It was about stripping away every layer of security and comfort we had, wearing us down until there was nothing left to defend. The first strike came before dawn on a Tuesday. The power went out, not the usual outage you get in Montana winters, but a precise, calculated blackout. I traced the failure to 3 separate cuts along the transmission line, each made with surgical accuracy. Even our backup generator, which had survived blizzards and windstorms for a decade, was dead. Its fuel line had been severed and the spark plug removed. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were looking for. By Wednesday, our internet was gone. The satellite dish on the barn roof had a neat bullet hole in the transceiver one-shot, perfect placement, fired from a distance that meant the shooter had to be a professional. We were blind to the outside world, and they knew it. Claire kept her head down, tending to the surviving cattle and patching fences cut in the night. But I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes constantly flicked toward the tree line. Hailey had stopped asking for permission to help. She was already doing it. Every night, she moved between the kitchen table and the secure laptop in the basement, compiling data from the surveillance devices we'd hidden around the property. The worst blow came on Friday morning. Claire found 2 of our mares down in the snow, their breaths ragged, foam on their lips. The autopsy showed a rare synthetic toxin, the kind you could only get through specialized suppliers. It mimicked symptoms of colic so closely that without the right chemical analysis, any vet would have written it off as a tragic accident. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Claire said, her voice low and sharp. "This is a kill order on everything we own, everything that keeps us alive here." I knew she was right. The escalation followed a pattern I'd seen in operations overseas. You don't hit the target directly at first. You take away their ability to eat, communicate, or move. You make them feel hunted. And once the prey is exhausted, you move in for the final strike. By Saturday night, the psychological games began in earnest. Drones with infrared lights buzzed over the property, hovering just long enough to let us know we were being watched. At 2 in the morning, floodlights snapped on from the ridge to the north, glaring into our windows for 20 straight minutes before cutting to black. Then the rumors started. We couldn't see them, but we could feel them spreading through the small town 60 miles away. Claire's supply orders were refused. Longtime friends wouldn't return her calls. Hailey's part-time job at the feed store evaporated overnight. And through one of my remaining contacts in town, I learned why. The story was that I was a dangerous, unstable veteran, one who'd threatened federal agents and had a history of violence. It was a textbook narrative-building operation. If something happened to us, the community would shake their heads and say they saw it coming. But isolation works both ways. For most people, it means weakness. For me, it meant no witnesses, no interference, no limits. That night, I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, cleaning the Sig Sauer P-226 I'd carried for years overseas. Hailey patted in, a blanket around her shoulders, and slid a flash drive across the table. "What's this?" I asked. She smirked my smirk, the one Claire said always meant trouble. The blueprint for whatever they're building, and the personnel list. I opened the files, my pulse quickening. Names, photos, deployment schedules. Not just the muscle they had, procurement officers, logistics managers, a communications chief. This was an organization, not a ragtag crew. Claire joined us, pouring coffee like it was any other late night, though her eyes were hard. "So, what's next?" I looked at both of them, realizing we'd crossed a line. They weren't just my wife and daughter anymore, they were my team. "Next," I said, "we make them think they're winning, and while they're celebrating, we take them apart from the inside." The decision was made. I'd played defense long enough. The following evening, while Claire tended the animals and Hailey monitored the cameras, I slipped out under the cover of darkness, heading toward the tree line where I'd seen the floodlights. I moved silently, the way I had in alleys overseas, each step deliberate. Half a mile in, I found what I was looking for, a camouflaged observation post, complete with a generator, a small heater, and a pair of thermal binoculars on a tripod. The men inside were sloppy, complacent, sipping coffee and complaining about the cold. They never saw me. When I left, the post was empty, its communications gear quietly repurposed to feed our bunker instead of theirs. If they wanted a war of nerves, they were about to find out what it was like to fight someone who'd spent his career making enemies disappear in the dark. By Sunday morning, the cold was sharp enough to bite through the seams of my jacket, but I barely felt it. The night raid on their observation post had shifted the balance, even if just slightly. For the first time since this started, we weren't just surviving, we were shaping the battlefield. Claire noticed it too. Over breakfast, she slid a folder toward me, her fingers brushing mine just long enough to say, "I'm in this with you." Inside were handwritten notes from her rounds visiting ranches, under the pretense of veterinary work. She'd mapped out which families had been pressured to sell, which officials had suddenly become uncooperative, and the exact dates livestock poisonings had occurred. The pattern was unmistakable. Every act of sabotage was preceded by a visit from someone tied to Drake Global. Hailey added her own intel. Overnight, she'd cracked into one of Drake's encrypted servers, piggybacking off the stolen comms gear from the observation post, and found an internal calendar. Deployment schedules for security teams, delivery manifests for unmarked cargo trucks, even scheduled inspection visits from county officials who were clearly in on the scheme. "What are we looking at?" Claire asked, leaning over my shoulder as I scrolled. "A timetable," I said, "and it tells us exactly where they're going to be and when." That was the pivot point. No more waiting for them to hit us, we'd hit them first. We started small. 2 nights later, while one of Drake's contractor teams was en route to harass the Jenkins Ranch, they found their fuel tanks mysteriously bone dry halfway down an unlit forest road. By the time they got a tow truck, their tires had been slashed clean through. The next morning, a shipment of fencing materials for one of Drake's construction sites arrived at the wrong location 20 miles away after Hailey rerouted the GPS coordinates in the logistics system. But these weren't just petty wins. Every action was calculated to make them second-guess their own security, to sow distrust within their ranks. I'd learned long ago that breaking an enemy's confidence was as effective as breaking their bones. On Thursday, we escalated. Using intel from Hailey's server breach, I identified a storage barn on one of Drake's recently acquired properties. The blueprints labeled it as agricultural supply, but infrared surveillance told a different story: constant heat signatures, late-night comings and goings, and armed guards rotating every 2 hours. Claire volunteered to be the distraction. Dressed in her vet gear, she drove up in her battered Ford truck and claimed she'd been called to treat a sick horse. While the guards argued about whether to let her in, I came in through the back, slipping past the weak spot in their perimeter. Inside, the barn was nothing like the outside suggested. Crates stacked to the ceiling bore no markings except for serial numbers I recognized from military supply chains. I popped one open. Inside were rifles, brand new, still sealed in packing grease. Another crate held night vision goggles, tactical radios, and suppressors. But the real prize was in a locked steel cabinet in the corner: ledgers. Actual paper records, detailing payments to contractors, bribes to local officials, and transactions with shell companies overseas. I snapped photos of everything, then set a timed thermite charge on the steel cabinet. When it ignited, the fire burned white-hot, consuming the records before anyone could even smell the smoke. By the time the guards realized what was happening, Claire was already driving us away, waving cheerfully like she'd just delivered medicine to a grateful client. That night, in the bunker, I spread the photos across the table. "This is the kind of evidence that doesn't just hurt her locally, it burns her entire network." Hailey grinned, a glint of pride in her eyes. "So, when do we drop it?" "Not yet," I said. "We let her bleed a little more first." The bleeding started almost immediately. With the ledgers gone, Drake's contractors began missing paychecks. Rumors spread about stolen shipments, about internal leaks, about a possible federal investigation. Men started quitting mid-contract. Trucks left half-loaded. Communications grew terse and paranoid. But Victoria Drake herself didn't flinch. If anything, she doubled down. On Friday evening, one of Hailey's taps caught her voice on a secure call. "If Cross wants a war, we'll give him one. Bring in the specialists." I'd heard that tone before in war zones, right before an escalation that left bodies in its wake. Specialists meant she was done with intimidation and ready for elimination. I met Claire's eyes across the table. "She's bringing in her best." Claire didn't blink. "So will we." We began hardening the ranch again, but this time it wasn't just defense. I dug out caches I hadn't touched in years: suppressed carbines, claymore mines, encrypted radios. Claire set up triage stations in the bunker, her medical supplies reorganized for rapid access. Hailey worked through the night, rewriting code to give us control over any drone they sent our way. The Cross family wasn't just holding the line anymore. We were hunting. And the moment Victoria Drake's specialists set foot in our valley, they'd learn what it meant to go to war with people who'd already buried ghosts in darker places than this. The storm rolled in from the north on Saturday night, swallowing the mountains in a wall of white. By midnight, the wind was howling hard enough to shake the window panes, and the snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. Perfect cover for what was coming. I'd used storms like this overseas nature's own smokescreen. Drake's specialists were smart enough to know the same trick. At 2:43, Hailey's motion sensors lit up the bunker's main screen. 8 figures, moving in staggered formation through the blizzard, thermals glowing against the frozen landscape. They advanced with the precision of a unit that had done this 100 times before spacing perfect, weapons up, comms chatter tight and disciplined. Claire looked at me from her station, her .308 sniper rifle laid across the table beside a field med kit. "Rangers?" she asked. I studied the way they moved, how they hugged the tree line, leapfrogging in pairs. "Close. SEALs or Delta. Top shelf." We'd prepared for this. The perimeter was a mix of old rancher ingenuity and the kind of unconventional defenses you only learn from black operations. Claymores wired to trip lines hidden under fresh snow. Motion-activated floodlights rigged to flare and blind night vision goggles. And deeper in, overlapping kill zones where our fire could cross without risking each other. At 2:50, the first trip line snapped. The explosion was muffled by the snow, but the white flash lit up the ridge for a heartbeat, followed by shouts in the storm. Their formation held, but I could feel the shift. They were on edge now. From her position in the loft of the barn, Claire opened fire. The crack of her rifle was swallowed almost instantly by the wind, but the results showed in Hailey's feed. One thermal signature dropped, writhing in the snow before going still. The specialists adapted quickly. 2 broke off to flank, while the rest increased their pace toward the house. I slipped out the back, keeping low, my suppressed carbine tight against my shoulder. The blizzard worked both ways. It hid them from us, but it also made them deaf and blind to someone who knew the land like I did. I caught the flankers by the east fence line, their outlines just visible against the dark blur of the storm. I waited until they were inside the choke point between 2 drifts, then opened up with controlled bursts. One went down instantly. The other spun, firing blind, rounds kicking up snow less than 2 feet from my boots. I closed the distance and dropped him with a single shot to the chest. In the bunker, Hailey's voice came over comms, steady despite the chaos. "Dad. West side, breach 2 inbound." I sprinted through the storm, ducking under the skeletal branches of a wind-bent pine. Through the blowing snow, I saw them 2 dark shapes moving toward the house, weapons ready. I cut across their path, using a low fence for cover, and lobbed a flashbang. Even through their NVGs, the burst of light in the whiteout must have been blinding. I was on them before they recovered, disarming one with a twist that snapped his wrist and slamming the other into the snow hard enough to knock the air out of him. The comms crackled again, Claire this time. 3 left. They're pulling back to regroup. Regrouping meant they weren't giving up. These weren't contractors who'd cut and run after a bad night. They were professionals. And professionals came back harder. We didn't give them the chance. Using the live feeds from Hailey's hijacked drones, we tracked their retreat through the tree line. Claire picked off one more from the loft. The remaining 2 realized too late they were being funneled toward the same choke point where I'd taken out the flankers. When the last shot faded into the storm, the only sounds were the wind and the creak of snow-laden branches. 8 came in. None walked out. I dragged the bodies into a drift where the snow would keep them until I decided what to do with them. War in the field teaches you to respect your enemy, but it also teaches you to clean up fast. By dawn, the storm was easing. The ranch looked untouched, blanketed in pure white. To anyone passing overhead, it was just another Montana morning. But under that stillness lay the remnants of a battle that had cost Victoria Drake her best team. Back in the bunker, Hailey sat at her console, replaying the drone footage with a mix of awe and grim satisfaction. Claire was already packing away her rifle, her movements calm, deliberate. "She's not going to stop," Claire said. "No," I agreed. "But neither are we." I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam rising in the cold air, and looked at my family, my team. If this had been her strongest hand, then the next move was mine, and I intended to make it hurt. The snowstorm had given us a decisive win, but it also drew a line in the ice. There was no going back. 8 of her best men had disappeared in the white, and Victoria Drake wouldn't forgive that. She'd escalate again, but this time, I wasn't going to wait. It was my turn to set the terms. At first light, I spread the intel we'd gathered across the bunker's table. Every map, photograph, intercepted message, and hacked document Hailey had pulled together over the past month was there. We weren't just looking at a criminal network anymore, we had the anatomy of it. Supply chains, money trails, communication hubs, even the names of foreign buyers whose governments officially denied they existed. "This is enough to put her away," Claire said, flipping through the photos of crates from the storage barn. "But she'll be gone before we can get a federal team up here. She's too connected." "Exactly," I replied, "which is why we're going to her before she has a chance to vanish." Drake was meticulous. She rotated her physical locations every week, never sleeping in the same place twice. But her communications patterns had tell small, almost imperceptible slips in timing and routing. Hailey found one. On Thursdays, she always spent 2 hours off-grid. Her location triangulated between a private airstrip and a hunting lodge in the Bitterroot Range. "That lodge is where she meets her high-value contacts," I said. "It's remote, secure, and the kind of place where she'll feel untouchable. We're going to change that." Preparation was surgical. Claire packed a trauma kit and enough tranquilizers to knock out a small army her cover would be as a medical contractor responding to a supposed hunting accident. Hailey would run point on surveillance and electronic interference from the bunker, spoofing cell signals to keep Drake's people blind. My role was simple: get inside, isolate Drake, and end this on our terms. The drive to the lodge took 3 hours through winding mountain roads, slick with leftover ice. I parked a mile out, moving the rest of the way on foot. The air was brittle, every breath puffing into white mist. Through the pines, I saw an expensive log and stone structure perched on a ridge, smoke curling from its chimney, 2 black SUVs parked out front. I counted 4 guards outside, 2 more visible through the wide lodge windows. Inside, Drake sat by the fire, her tailored coat draped over the back of her chair, a crystal glass in her hand. She looked calm. Too calm. Hailey's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Comms are jammed. You're clear for 10 minutes before they realize something's wrong." I moved fast. The first guard dropped silently into the snow with a chokehold. The second followed with a sharp blow to the temple. The other 2 never saw me until I was through the front door. Claire's cover held she was already inside, tending to a wounded lodge staffer we'd planted earlier. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to point their weapons or clear the scene. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. In less than 30 seconds, I had Drake on her feet, her own crystal glass shattering on the hearth as I shoved her into a side room. Claire shut the door behind us and stood guard. Up close, Victoria Drake wasn't the polished titan from the Escalade. She was smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were the same cold, assessing, unafraid. "You've made quite the mess, Mr. Cross," she said, smoothing her coat as if we were about to sit down for tea. "You brought it here," I countered. "You came after my family, my home." I tossed a thick folder onto the desk between us. Photos spilled out her crates, her payment ledgers, her bribes, her weapons transfers. "This is going to every federal agency in the country unless you walk away from this valley today." She smiled faintly, almost pitying. You still think this is about your land? This was never about Montana. You were the target from the beginning. Her words hit like a gut punch, but I didn't let it show. Then you picked the wrong target. Or the right one, she said. The people I work for, they've wanted you out of the picture since Damascus. And they don't fail twice. Before I could respond, Hailey's urgent voice burst into my ear. Dad, incoming 2 more SUVs just pulled up. You've got company. I yanked Drake to her feet, the barrel of my pistol pressed against her ribs. You're walking us out of here, I told her. You won't make it past the front door, she said, her smile widening. She might have been right, except we'd already planned for this. Claire triggered the smoke charges we'd planted along the entry hall. In seconds, the lodge was filled with thick, choking gray, the shouts of her guards muffled and confused. We moved through the chaos like shadows, slipping out the back and down the ridge where my truck was hidden. By the time the smoke cleared, we were gone. Drake was in our custody, her wrists bound, her face pale in the early light. This isn't over, she hissed as I drove us down the mountain road. No, I agreed, eyes on the snow-slick asphalt ahead. It's just starting. We didn't take Drake back to the ranch. That would have been reckless. And I wasn't about to put Claire and Hailey under the same roof as a woman who'd signed off on killing them. Instead, we brought her to a safe house I'd kept for emergencies, an old ranger station deep in the Absaroka wilderness, 40 miles from the nearest paved road. The place was as Spartan as it gets. Concrete floors, a wood stove, a table, and 2 chairs. Drake sat in one of them now, her wrists zip-tied, the dim orange glow of the stove painting sharp shadows across her face. She looked at me like we were just 2 professionals in a tense negotiation, not predator and prey. You think you've won, she said, voice steady despite the cold. I think, I replied, setting down a steel case on the table, that you've run out of moves. Inside the case was everything we'd gathered: Hailey's data dumps, Claire's field intel, my surveillance photos, names, dates, payment records, shipment logs, enough to burn her network from Montana to the Middle East. You hand that over to the feds, she said, and you'll have more than just my people coming after you. The people above me don't show up in any database, but their reach, well, you've seen it. That's the plan, I told her. Smoke them out. Tear their network apart before they can vanish again. I'd already set the wheels in motion. At dawn, encrypted copies of the evidence were transmitted to every federal contact I could still trust: CIA, FBI, DHS. Not the public channels, but the men and women I'd worked with in darker days, people who knew what to do with intel this sensitive. Simultaneously, Hailey had triggered a dead man's switch. If anything happened to us, the full file would go to every major investigative journalist in the country. Drake didn't flinch, but I saw the smallest tightening around her eyes. She knew what that meant. Her own people wouldn't protect her if they thought she'd become a liability. The first cracks appeared within hours. My contacts confirmed raids were already underway in Billings, Denver, and Salt Lake City. Warehouses emptied in the night, bank accounts frozen, shell corporations exposed. In Bozeman, one of her logistics managers tried to slip across the Canadian border with a duffel bag full of cash. He didn't make it. Claire monitored the chatter from a corner of the room, her earpiece connected to our tapped comms. They're turning on each other, she reported. Half of her security detail has gone dark. The other half is demanding payment. Drake just smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting it. You're naive if you think cutting off the head kills the snake. This is bigger than me, Cross. Then I'll keep cutting, I said. By nightfall, the safe house was lit only by the flicker of the stove. Outside, the wind rattled the old wooden shutters. Hailey sat across from Drake, her laptop open, eyes locked on the scrolling lines of code. Dad, she said, I found something in her personal server. A folder marked Damascus. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not in any way I could talk about. Hailey clicked it open. Inside were operational files, real ones on the mission that had supposedly killed me. Photos of the safe house in Syria, surveillance logs, even internal CIA memos. But one detail froze me. An order signed by a name I recognized, a man I'd trusted, authorizing my termination as a compromised asset. I looked at Drake. Where did you get this? Her smile widened. You still think I came after you for your land? This was the job, Cross. You were the job. The valley, the resort, all of it was cover to draw you out. My employers wanted you in the open where you could be resolved. It hit like a hammer. Every attack, every casualty, every night we'd spent waiting for the next move, it had all been bait, and I'd walked right into it. But bait works both ways. Hailey, I said, never taking my eyes off Drake, send the Damascus file to the same list as the rest. Drake's eyes narrowed for the first time. You'll be signing your own death warrant. Then I'll die on my feet, I told her. But I won't die in the dark. The file went out. And with it, a shockwave I knew would ripple through every corner of the intelligence world. Damascus wasn't just my secret, it was theirs. And now it was out in the light. By morning, federal agents arrived at the ranger station. Drake was taken away in cuffs, her expression unreadable. As they loaded her into the SUV, she leaned toward me just enough for her voice to cut through the wind. This isn't the end, Cross. The ones who sent me, when they come, you'll wish it was me you were dealing with. I watched the convoy disappear into the trees. Claire came to stand beside me, her arm brushing mine. Hailey was in the doorway, her face pale but determined. The storm had passed, but the horizon ahead was darker than ever. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war wasn't over. It had just changed battlefields. At its core, this story isn't just about a former CIA operative defending his ranch. It's about the unyielding will to protect what truly matters and the cost of standing your ground when every force imaginable tries to break you. Ethan Cross's fight against Victoria Drake and her network is a brutal reminder that sometimes the enemy isn't wearing a foreign uniform or waving a flag in open hostility. Sometimes the enemy is sophisticated, polished, and hiding behind legal documents, corporate fronts, and political connections. One of the clearest lessons here is that intimidation only works if you let fear take root. Drake's entire strategy, psychological warfare, isolation, financial strangulation, was designed to make the Cross family believe resistance was hopeless. But by refusing to give her that power, Ethan flipped the dynamic. When you stop playing by your enemy's rules, you change the game entirely. Another lesson is the value of preparation and adaptability. Ethan's survival wasn't luck. It was the result of years of experience, meticulous observation, and a refusal to underestimate his opponent. Every defensive measure, every counterattack, was grounded in knowledge of both his own capabilities and the weaknesses of those hunting him. In a broader sense, it's a reminder that in life, preparation is an act of self-respect. It's how you safeguard the people and principles you're willing to fight for. The story also underscores the importance of unity under pressure. Ethan, Claire, and Hailey were more than just a family. They became a cohesive operational team, each leveraging their unique skills to contribute to the fight. In crises, whether in war zones or in personal battles, trust and shared purpose can transform ordinary people into an unshakable force. Finally, there's the uncomfortable truth revealed in the Damascus files. Betrayal can come from inside the very structures you once served. It's a warning to remain vigilant, to never assume loyalty from systems whose priorities can shift without warning. The past can be weaponized against you, and the only real defense is to own your truth and be willing to face it in the open. The overarching message? Strength isn't just about firepower or training, it's about resilience, clarity of purpose, and the courage to face overwhelming odds without surrendering your values. Sometimes the best offense is refusing to yield an inch, no matter how many enemies gather at your gates.